If you think about the classic detective story, the image that probably pops right into your head first is the magnifying glass.
Oh, absolutely. Sherlock Holmes and the Deerstalker.
Right. It is that total obsession with the tangible, like the physical stuff, the footprint in the damp mud, or the specific type of cigar ash left on the Persian rug.
Or the meticulously plotted train schedules.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. We have been trained by, well, decades of the golden age of mystery fiction to view crime scenes like broken machines.
I mean, you just need the right engineer to come in, find the physical break in the gear, and point to it.
And it's entirely about what you can see, measure, and categorize. Nothing else really matters to those guys.
Which is incredibly comforting when you really think about it. We inherently like the world to be binary like that.
Yeah, black and white.
Right. The mud on the boot either matches the clay from the riverbank or it does not. The timeline either places the suspect in the drawing room at 9 o'clock or, it provides them with an ironclad alibi.
It's just math at that point.
Exactly. It turns human tragedy into a mathematical equation that can be neatly balanced.
But what happens when that equation is built on a fundamental misunderstanding of how human beings actually operate?
Oh, that's where things fall apart for the classic detectives.
Right. What happens when the physical evidence is perfectly, meticulously staged and the real clues are, well, entirely invisible?
That is the big question.
Welcome to a very special Chesterton Radio Deep Dive, broadcasting straight to you from Atchison, Kansas. Today, we are taking everything you think you know about classic detective work and completely flipping it on its head.
We really are. We are diving into a groundbreaking and frankly wildly subversive 1910 collection of stories by Baroness Orczy.
It's titled Lady Molly of Scotland Yard, and I'm so excited to get into this.
It is an absolute landmark piece of fiction. But unfortunately, it's one that frequently gets overshadowed by the heavily male-dominated golden age of mysteries that came after it.
Yeah, which is a real shame.
It is. I mean, Baroness Orczy is widely remembered today for creating the Scarlet Pimpernel, but what she did with Lady Molly is arguably just as revolutionary.
Oh, for sure.
She created one of the very first female detectives in literature who is actually officially associated with the police force.
And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly how Lady Molly subverted the entire genre. We're going to look at the brilliant, highly psychological methods of Molly Robertson-Kirk.
Her methods are just fascinating.
Because while her male colleagues at Scotland Yard are, literally crawling around on their hands and knees looking for dropped matchsticks, Molly is looking at the people.
She's looking right past the physical clues.
Yeah. She's looking at their fears, their class anxieties, and their maternal instincts. And beside her, through all of this, is her incredibly loyal assistant, Mary Grenard.
Who actually serves as the narrator for all of these adventures, which is a really important detail.
Yeah, tell us about that framing.
Well, that framing is crucial. We are seeing these events through the eyes of a woman who is fiercely protective of Molly and who provides us with a front row seat to how the established male detectives repeatedly fail.
And they fail a lot.
They really do. In the sources we're looking at today, the traditional physical clues don't just come up short, they actively mislead the police.
The established authorities are constantly looking for mechanical solutions to emotional problems.
Exactly. But Lady Molly operates on the fundamental realization that human beings are driven by irrational pressures.
Like what kind of pressures?
Well, they're driven by systemic societal rules,
Right.
by deep-seated religious terrors, by love, and honestly by panic.
Wow.
She utilizes acute psychology, an absolute mastery of human nature, and what the text occasionally refers to as feminine intuition, to outsmart everyone in the room.
Okay, let's unpack this, because from the very first case we are introduced to, the contrast between the rigid, bumbling male detectives of the yard and Lady Molly's elegant, deeply psychological approach is just staggering.
It's like night and day.
To set the scene for you, in 1910, the very idea of a woman operating within Scotland Yard was treated as a novelty at best and a nuisance at worst.
Right. Mary Grenard explicitly points out to the reader how dreadfully snubbed the so-called female department is by the men.
They are essentially relegated to the basement of investigative priority. But Molly gets her proving ground with a truly gruesome, perplexing case known as the Ninescore mystery.
It is a remarkably dark narrative to start a career on. Ninescore is an isolated, sleepy little village in Kent, down near Canterbury.
It's the kind of place where nothing ever happens, right?
Until it does. The inciting incident takes place at an estate called Ash Court, An undergardener named Timothy Coleman is walking past a stagnant, slimy pond on the property, and he notices something bright blue sticking out of the mud.
Ugh, and it is a woman's body, but it's not just a clean clinical crime scene.
No, not at all.
The body is heavily decomposed because the victim was shoved violently, face first, right into the thick slime of the pond. It is a horrific, visceral image.
The local police, led by a man named Inspector Measures, are immediately called in, and they are completely stumped by the how and the why.
They do, however, manage to identify the victim relatively quickly, and they do this using entirely physical markers.
Right, they identify the bright blue serge dress with white facings, a specific pearl and ruby ring on her finger, and a red leather purse.
And based on these tangible items, they conclude the victim is a local village woman named Mary Nichols.
They follow the physical breadcrumbs. And this is exactly where Inspector Measures and his men hit a massive, impenetrable wall.
Because they try to reconstruct the timeline of Mary's last known movements, right?
Yes. Through village gossip, they learn that Mary lived with her older, much more responsible sister, Susan.
And what else do they find out?
Well, the gossip also paints a picture of Mary as being somewhat flighty, possessing a questionable reputation, and crucially having an illegitimate baby girl whom she keeps hidden away with a caregiver named Mrs. Williams out on the Canterbury Road.
Oh, wow. In the Edwardian era, an illegitimate child in a small village wasn't just a scandal, it was a social death sentence.
Absolutely ruinous.
And the gossip points directly to a very wealthy aristocrat man named Lionel Lydgate, who subsequently inherits the title of Lord Edbrook as the father of this hidden child.
Right, people had seen him coming down from London to take Mary for private carriage rides.
So the police start piecing together a timeline based on witness testimony. On a pitch-black, miserably drizzly night, a neighbor hears Mary and her sister Susan leaving their cottage.
A local carter driving his wagon in the dark hears a man's voice calling out for Mary.
And later that same night, Mary bursts into the cottage of Mrs. Williams, soaking wet, absolutely frantic, shoves money into the caregiver's hands for the baby's keep, wildly kisses the infant, and announces she might be gone for a very long time.
And then both sisters simply vanish into the ether.
Until the body in the blue dress is pulled from the Ash Court pond a fortnight later.
Look at the data points the police are working with here. They have the specific dates logged in the red purse found on the body. They have the carter's auditory testimony of the man in the dark.
And they interrogate Lord Edbrook, who presents them with a seemingly ironclad alibi.
Swearing up and down that he had not seen Mary on that specific day, and that he was miles away at his brother's estate.
So the male detectives are completely paralyzed. The physical timeline contradicts itself.
Yeah. If Mary was killed that night, how did she visit the baby? If she visited the baby later, how did she end up in the pond?
And most importantly, where is the older sister, Susan?
They cannot figure out the mechanics of the crime because they are completely ignoring the psychology of the people involved.
This is the exact moment Lady Molly steps in. She essentially has to beg the Chief of Scotland Yard to let her go down to Kent and investigate.
And when she arrives at Ninescore, she does not go out to the pond to look for more footprints in the mud. She doesn't ask to measure the depth of the water.
She looks squarely at the human element. Specifically, she looks at the psychology of a desperate mother.
Molly executes a maneuver that is breathtaking in its audacity.
She places a highly strategic, completely fabricated news article in a widely read London evening paper.
The headline is designed to scream off the page. The Ninescore mystery. Mary Nichols's baby dying.
The text of the article claims the hidden infant has fallen deathly ill and is on the brink of being sent to the workhouse.
We have to pause and understand the absolute terror of that word in 1910, the workhouse.
It was awful, right?
It wasn't just an orphanage. It was a penal institution for the poor. It meant institutionalized starvation, hard labor, and total social erasure.
To an Edwardian mother, sending a child to the workhouse was a fate worse than death.
Molly knew this. And the result of her trap is instantaneous.
The very next morning, the local police station in Ninescore receives a frantic telegram, and shortly after, a woman bursts through their doors.
The woman who was supposed to be decomposing in the Ash Court pond is standing right in front of them, alive, breathing, and terrified. Mary Nichols had returned.
It is a phenomenal, jaw-dropping twist. The body in the pond was never Mary. It was the missing older sister, Susan, dressed in Mary's clothes.
Yes, Molly unspools the real story, and it has absolutely nothing to do with train schedules.
So what actually happened?
Susan had been secretly blackmailing the aristocratic Lord Edbrooke over the illegitimate child. On the night of the murder, Mary was far too frightened to meet him in the dark woods.
So Susan, taking matters into her own hands, put on Mary's recognizable blue dress, took her purse and her ring to look the part, and went out to extort the Lord.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Edbrooke, driven to violence by the blackmail, murdered her in the dark. He realized too late that he had killed the wrong sister.
To hide the identity and buy himself time, he shoved her face deep into the mud.
Then, he ran to the real Mary, confessed what happened, and convinced her to hide away, promising that if she just stayed out of sight so she couldn't be called to testify against him, he would take care of her and the child later.
Consider the absolute failure of the traditional investigative method here. The police would never have found Mary if they had just kept looking for physical evidence of her whereabouts. She was successfully hidden.
But Molly deduced the entire invisible psychological web holding the crime together.
She understood that Mary's romantic loyalty to Lord Edbrooke, the powerful, wealthy father of her child, was incredibly strong.
Mary, a lower-class village girl, was entirely willing to disappear into the shadows and let her own sister's brutal murder go unpunished if it meant protecting the man she loved.
But Molly also knew there was one singular, primal instinct that could shatter that romantic loyalty.
The maternal instinct.
Precisely. Molly knew that maternal panic, combined with a fierce protective pride, would override every other consideration.
When Mary reads that article, when she believes her baby is dying and being condemned to the horrors of a pauper's workhouse, all logic and loyalty to the murderer evaporate.
She rushes into the police station, and in her hysteria, she blurts out, "The workhouse! And her father, a lord!"
In one single sentence of panicked maternal defiance, she inadvertently confesses the entire secret motive that the murderer had killed to keep hidden.
I have to push back a little here, though, when we really look at what Molly actually did. Analyze her tactic. She literally prints fake news about an innocent infant slowly dying, purely to manipulate a mother's heart and force her out of hiding.
It is extreme, yes.
If we think about this in modern terms, it is almost like a highly targeted, emotionally devastating digital phishing scam, or the most cruel, manipulative clickbait imaginable. Isn't it profoundly brutal to use a child's health, even a fabricated illness, as bait to catch a killer?
What's fascinating here is that Baroness Orczy is very deliberately establishing Lady Molly on a completely different moral plane than her rigid male counterparts. Well, the traditional detectives of Scotland Yard operate on polite conventions, bureaucratic procedures, and strict, literal interpretations of the law. They are gentlemen playing a game with rules.
And Molly isn't playing that game.
Not at all. Molly does not see this as a game. She prioritizes the ultimate justice, catching a brutal aristocratic killer who genuinely believed his immense wealth and title made him immune to consequences.
She understands that the only way to break a desperate woman's devotion to a toxic, murderous man is to aggressively exploit an even deeper, more primal devotion.
Is it ruthless? Absolutely. But it is a psychological ruthlessness that recognizes the raw, unvarnished realities of human attachment. She is willing to break the polite rules of conventional investigation to achieve a higher moral victory.
And you cannot argue with the results. Once Mary resurfaces and the secret is out, Lord Edbrooke realizes the protective wall of his class and wealth has completely crumbled.
Knowing the police are closing in, he ultimately throws himself in front of a speeding express train to avoid the public humiliation of a trial and the gallows.
It is an incredibly explosive start to her career. But what makes Molly so dangerous to criminals is that she doesn't just understand the primal instincts of working-class village girls.
Oh no, she is equally adept, if not more so, at reading the highly refined, utterly hypocritical, and tightly wound world of Edwardian high society.
Which brings us to a crucial conceptual transition. We are moving from the survival instincts of the working class to the reputational survival of the elite.
Molly knows how to navigate the invisible barriers of class, a world that these solidly working-class or middle-class male detectives of Scotland Yard fundamentally fail to understand.
Those men are deeply intimidated by immense wealth and inherited titles, aren't they?
They defer to it completely. Lady Molly, possessing her own aristocratic background, which we will touch on later, is not intimidated in the slightest.
Let's examine how this plays out in the case of the Fruin miniatures. It is a masterpiece of sociological deduction.
It really is.
We have Mr. Fruin, who is this immensely wealthy, obsessive art collector, but he is currently bedridden, totally paralyzed, and hovering on the edge of death.
His prized possession is a collection of Engelhardt miniatures, tiny, exquisite portraits valued at a staggering £10,000.
That's a massive fortune back then. He has a beautiful, highly aristocratic wife, the Honorable Mrs. Fruin, and he has a son, Lionel, who is a complete disgrace.
Lionel is a spendthrift who accumulated massive...
Therefore, the police conclude, a professional sneak thief must have been lurking in the shrubbery, slipped inside during that 20-second window, hidden in the shadows, and stolen the miniatures.
To the male detectives, it is a perfectly logical, mechanically sound theory, and it is completely, spectacularly wrong.
Because they completely miss the massive, glaring, aristocratic family dynamics staring them in the face. Molly looks at this theory and practically laughs.
She points out a glaring psychological inconsistency. Mrs. Fruin is about to inherit a massive, life-altering income upon her husband's imminent death.
Why would a professional thief choose to strike at the exact chaotic hour the master of the house is actively dying?
Right. The household is awake, doctors are coming and going, anxiety is high. It is the worst possible time for a burglary.
But Molly figures out the underlying architecture of the crime. 2 years prior, the disgraced son, Lionel, had incurred those horrific debts.
Now, what are unavowable debts in 1910? It means gambling debts, blackmail, or something so socially toxic it would destroy the family name forever.
Mrs. Fruin, desperate to save her son's reputation from a catastrophic public scandal, secretly copied the miniatures herself.
She was known to be a very talented amateur artist. She gave the genuine £10,000 masterpieces to her son to smuggle abroad and sell to cover his debts.
And here is the absolute genius of her deduction, which relies entirely on understanding Edwardian inheritance law.
Molly realizes that Mrs. Fruin successfully fooled her paralyzed half-blind husband with her clever fakes for 2 entire years.
But the moment Mr. Fruin takes his last breath, the legal mechanism of probate kicks in. The will must be executed.
External professional experts and lawyers will immediately come into the house to appraise the entire estate for the legal heir, who happens to be a nephew named James Hyam, not the disgraced son.
The moment an expert looks at the cabinet, the fakes would be discovered, the fraud exposed, and the scandal she sacrificed everything to prevent would detonate.
Therefore, Mrs. Fruin had to stage a dramatic physical burglary to steal her own fakes before the probate lawyers arrived in the morning.
It is brilliant. It's a crime committed not to steal wealth, but to steal evidence of poverty.
And how Molly catches her is even more theatrical.
Oh, the hotel scene. Tell us about that.
Molly tracks Mrs. Fruin to the opulent Hotel Metropole in Brighton. Molly sets a psychological snare in the middle of the dining room.
She sits at a table near the widow and begins speaking loudly to her assistant, Mary, about how she, Molly, recently purchased 2 highly unique, exquisite Engelhart miniatures from a dealer in Budapest, which happens to be the exact city where the disgraced son sold the real ones.
Molly then casually asked Mary to run upstairs and fetch a sealed packet from her room so they can look at them.
Mrs. Fruin overhears this and is struck by absolute terror. She believes her son's crime and her own complicity are about to be exposed in the middle of a hotel dining room.
She is so panicked that she actually intercepts Mary in the hallway and offers her a bribe of £200 just to let her look inside the packet for 1 second.
It is a beautiful, agonizing psychological squeeze. Molly steps out of the shadows in the hallway, takes the packet from Mary, opens it right in front of the terrified widow, and reveals is just blank, empty cardboard.
There were no miniatures. Molly forced Mrs. Fruin to reveal her own guilt through her sheer desperation to cover up her son's tracks.
Once again, Molly uses the intense devotion of a mother to her child, this time to a disgraced adult son, to break the case wide open.
She didn't find the missing miniatures. She found the anxiety of the woman who hid them.
And we see this exact same mastery of high society pressures, but with significantly darker, bloodier consequences in the Fordwich Castle mystery.
Here's where it gets really interesting because the stakes escalate from reputational damage to absolute cold-blooded murder, and the ending is incredibly grim.
We have the brutal murder of an Indian nurse named Runa right inside the grand walls of Fordwich Castle.
The suspect pool is entirely aristocratic. The imposing Baroness d'Albuquerque, her athletic niece Henriette, and her other niece, Joan Duplessis.
The context of Joan's background is essential here. Joan's father was a Frenchman living in Pondicherry, India, a colonial outpost.
The aristocratic English family had basically disowned him for this.
Now, Joan has returned to England and is desperately trying to prove in a court of law that she is the legitimate, rightful heir to the barony.
To win her case, she absolutely needs Runa, who was her childhood nurse in India, to take the stand and swear under oath to the exact specific date of her mother's death and her father's subsequent marriage.
If Runa swears to this specific fabricated timeline, Joan inherits the title, the castle, and the massive fortune.
But before the trial, Runa is found murdered in her bed. Someone placed a chloroform-soaked handkerchief over her face to subdue her, and then brutally cut her throat.
When the male detectives arrive, they immediately start running around looking for physical clues to build a mechanical chain of events.
Right. They proudly note that the chloroform was actually purchased by Runa herself days earlier for a toothache.
They find that a specific carving knife is missing from the butler's pantry downstairs, but they have absolutely no idea who wielded the knife or why.
Molly, arriving on the scene, completely ignores the missing knife. She looks at the victim's religious psychology.
What does she find?
She discovers through her inquiries that Runa, who was originally born a Parsi in India, had recently become a fiercely devout, deeply zealous convert to Roman Catholicism.
This is where Molly functions as a profound societal mirror. She understands the interior, spiritual lives of the people involved.
She realizes that Runa, as a fervent new Catholic convert, was absolutely paralyzingly terrified of the concept of eternal hellfire.
Runa loved her young mistress. She was perfectly willing to physically die for Joan.
But she was no longer willing to commit the mortal damning sin of perjury on the witness stand for her.
Joan needed Runa to lie under oath to legally secure the massive inheritance. When Runa refused out of deep-seated religious terror, Joan realized her entire future was collapsing.
So Joan murdered her devoted nurse in cold blood to silence her and staged the violent scene to look like a mysterious external assassination.
Molly bypasses the physical crime scene and goes looking for the psychological evidence. She searches Runa's room and finds the hidden proof.
Where's the proof?
A Catholic prayer book and a key that confirm the nurse's secret devoutness and her refusal to lie. Molly then tracks Joan to a local inn.
And the confrontation is just chilling.
Molly sits across a table from Joan. She doesn't yell, she doesn't pull out handcuffs.
She simply has her male colleague, Detective Pegram, walk into the room and place the physical proof he just seized from Joan's luggage onto the table.
The moment Joan sees those papers, she realizes she is completely trapped. But she doesn't try to fight. She doesn't demand to call her high-priced lawyers.
She lets out a shrill, haunting cry of absolute despair, turns, runs to the open window of the inn, and throws herself out.
It is a 40-foot drop to the unforgiving stone pavement below. She chose instantaneous, brutal physical destruction over facing Lady Molly's justice and the excruciating public shame of the gallows.
It is an incredibly dark, shocking resolution, but it perfectly illustrates the thesis of Molly's entire methodology.
She knows that an ambitious aristocrat like Joan will literally slit a woman's throat to secure a title and a fortune, and will readily choose suicide over the stripping away of that hard-won social facade.
Molly solves crimes by diagnosing the systemic pressures of inheritance, the viciousness of class ambition, and the sheer desperation for social survival.
The male detectives are staring at the blood on the sheets. Molly is staring at the invisible social scaffolding that caused that blood to be spilled in the first place.
Which transitions us beautifully from how high society hides its motives to how society at large actively hides entire classes of people.
I want to talk about how Molly deals with the physical realities of her era, specifically the art of disguise and the cognitive blind spots of men.
We have two phenomenal cases in the source material that highlight this perfectly: the bag of sand and the woman in the big hat.
Both of these mysteries rely entirely on how people, and specifically male investigators and witnesses, perceive women based solely on their clothing.
Let us examine the mechanics of invisibility in the Edwardian era. In the case of the bag of sand, an affluent old lady, Mrs. Dunstan, is found asphyxiated in her bedroom.
A gas pipe was deliberately left open. The room is heavily locked from the inside.
The police are utterly baffled by the physical mechanics of how the killer got in and out.
The only conceivable clue they have is that a mysterious charwoman, a heavy-set cleaning lady referred to as Mrs. Thomas, was seen by a maid carrying a remarkably heavy bag of sand into the house earlier that evening.
But when the police try to track down this Mrs. Thomas, she vanishes into thin air.
The Domestic Employment Agency has no record of her. None of the other servants know her. She simply does not exist.
And the police respond by wasting all their time and resources, scouring London, looking for a middle-aged, working-class cleaning woman who carries sand.
Molly looks at the evidence and figures out almost immediately that Mrs. Thomas is a phantom. She is a social construct.
Right. The killer was actually a young, highly respectable, cold-blooded woman named Miss Crookshank, who served as Mrs. Dunstan's live-in companion.
Crookshank was furious because a younger rival girl was going to inherit Mrs. Dunstan's money.
So Crookshank, who is a Remind lady, simply dresses up in grimy, oversized clothes to impersonate a charwoman.
She carries the sand in to block the gap under the door so the gas won't escape, commits the murder, and then just takes off the grimy disguise, washes her face, and goes right back to being the respectable, grieving companion sitting in the parlor.
What is brilliant is not just the deduction, but how Molly proves it. She doesn't dust her fingerprints.
Molly herself actually puts on the grimy, soot-stained charwoman clothes that they find hidden deep in the coal cellar.
She covers her face in soot, alters her posture, and shows up at the house.
She confronts Miss Crookshank, pretending to be a fellow underworld blackmailer who knows her dark secret.
The psychological shock to Miss Crookshank of seeing the phantom charwoman she invented suddenly standing right there in her hallway, seemingly brought to life, causes her to break down completely and confess.
And then, on the total opposite end of the Edwardian fashion spectrum, we have the case of the woman in the big hat.
A wealthy, scandalous man named Mark Culloden is murdered in broad daylight in a busy, crowded Mathis's tea shop on Regent Street.
He is poisoned with morphia slipped into his chocolate.
The waitress who served them says he was sitting with a female companion, but when asked for a description, she realizes she cannot describe the woman's face at all.
Why? Because the woman was wearing a gargantuan, monstrously large velvet hat adorned with massive plumes.
To understand this, you had to picture the fashion of 1910. These were the Merry Widow hats, massive, wide-brimmed structures that were practically architectural.
The police hear, "Tall, elegant woman in a giant hat," and immediately arrest a beautiful, striking Austrian woman named Elizabeth Lowenthal, who was known to have a bitter grudge against the victim.
She perfectly fits the general description of a tall, imposing foreign woman. It seems like a closed case.
But Lady Molly proves Elizabeth's innocence by looking closely at the actual physics and mechanics of fashion.
Yes, this is where the deduction is so sharp. Molly points out a simple fact of line of sight.
If a genuinely tall woman wears a giant, wide-brimmed hat, and you are a waitress standing right next to her table serving tea, you would still be able to see her face looking up at you.
The angles dictate it. The only way a giant hat completely obscures a woman's face from a person standing right next to her is if the woman wearing the hat is exceptionally, unusually short.
The hat acts like an umbrella hiding the face from above.
Molly traces the custom-made velvet hat not to the tall Austrian, but to the victim's own widow, Lady Irene.
Lady Irene was a petite, diminutive woman who deliberately purchased the giant hat specifically to hide her face, met her husband in public, poisoned him to secure his fortune before he could legally disinherit her due to an impending scandal, and then simply threw the hat away.
It's just so clever.
I have to say, thinking about these two cases together, it is like both the giant velvet hat and the charwoman's soot-stained rags act as literal invisibility cloaks.
They absolutely do.
When people look at them, they do not see the human being underneath. They only see the social signifier. They see the uniform of abject poverty, or they see the ridiculous extreme of high fashion.
Have you ever noticed that in your own life? How your brain just edits out the person clearing the tables at a restaurant or the person wearing something so outrageously flashy that you only remember the clothes.
Yeah, it is a form of cognitive filtering. So how does Molly manage to see past what every single male detective is blindly staring at?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the era, we see exactly why the male detectives fail. They are victims of their own patriarchal conditioning.
They are easily distracted by feminine glamour. They see the striking beauty and foreignness of Elizabeth Lowenthal and immediately assume guilt.
Conversely, they are entirely dismissive of female domestic labor, assuming a charwoman is just a background object, a piece of walking furniture in a house, completely incapable of complex, premeditated murder.
The killers in these stories are brilliant because they weaponize these exact patriarchal blind spots.
Miss Crookshank knows that a gentleman detective will never look closely at a cleaning lady's face. Lady Irene knows that a giant, fashionable hat on a small woman renders her a faceless, frivolous fashion victim in the eyes of a male witness.
Molly, however, because she exists outside that male gaze, because she herself is a woman constantly underestimated by Scotland Yard, is not fooled by these signifiers.
She takes the killer's reliance on those patriarchal blind spots and weaponizes them right back against them.
She turns their camouflage into a massive, glaring beacon. Now, we have talked a lot about psychology and fashion, but we really need to dispel a major myth right now.
Oh, definitely.
The idea that Lady Molly is just an armchair detective. You know the trope, the brilliant mind who sits in a cozy London flat sipping Earl Grey tea and solving complex puzzles purely in their head while the police do the legwork.
That is not Molly. She is out in the field, and she takes massive physical risks.
Let's look at the sheer adrenaline of the case of the Irish tweed coat.
This investigation spans the entire European continent. An English estate overseer named Mr. Carthwaite is found dead in his lush garden in Palermo, Sicily.
He has a stiletto buried in his back, and his dead hand is fiercely clutching a torn piece of rough, distinctive Irish tweed.
The local Sicilian police immediately arrest a young English man named Cecil Shuttleworth, purely because the torn tweed perfectly matches a coat he is known to own.
Shuttleworth's desperate father comes rushing into Scotland Yard in London. He has managed to find the real killer's coat, complete with the tear, and the victim's stolen watch hidden in a London flat.
But the father is terrified. He believes that if he takes this physical evidence to Sicily, the deeply corrupt local police, who he suspects are heavily infiltrated by the mafia, will simply destroy the evidence to close the case quickly and hang his innocent son anyway.
So Molly and Mary volunteered to transport the physical evidence themselves across Europe, aiming to deliver it to a trusted, high-ranking official at the Austro-Italian border.
But they are being hunted. They are tracked across the continent by the real killer, a ruthless Italian named Chiatti, and his gang of accomplices.
The tension peaks when Molly and Mary are forced to stop overnight at a grand hotel in Budapest, and this is where it gets incredibly intense.
The killers have managed to infiltrate the hotel. They have a woman with them, a Mrs. Tadworth, who is secretly working with the gang. Her mission is to sneak into Molly's room and steal the evidence back.
It is a phenomenal, breathless sequence. Molly is hyping where they're being watched.
She anticipates that Chiatti is physically lurking in the dark hotel corridor outside their door.
So when Mrs. Tadworth enters the room, Molly doesn't call for the concierge. She engages in literal, physical, hand-to-hand combat.
Molly wrestles Mrs. Tadworth to the ground, overpowers her, ties her securely to the heavy bedpost, and leaves her there half unconscious and gagged so she cannot signal the gang outside.
Then Molly grabs the coat and the watch, sneaks out of the hotel through a back way, and makes a desperate dash for the frontier.
And here's the wildest part.
Aw.
She leaves Mary behind in the room to play the decoy.
Imagine being Mary. She wakes up, finds a strange woman hogtied to her bed, and before she can process it, Chiatti kicks the door in.
Mary doesn't shrink back. She boldly screams and accuses Chiatti of assault, alerting the entire floor.
She gets him arrested by the local Budapest police, creating a massive, chaotic diversion.
Because of Mary's sheer nerve in drawing all the attention, Molly successfully delivers the evidence to the border official in Cividale, and the innocent Shuttleworth is acquitted.
And we see a very similar willingness to embrace physical danger and chaos in the case called A Castle in Brittany.
Right. Molly and Mary travel to a remote, windswept French village.
There, they befriend a deeply eccentric, dying old woman named Mademoiselle de Genville.
This poor woman is surrounded by absolute vultures, primarily her greedy criminal nephew, the Marquis de Terhoven, and his equally awful mother.
They are essentially just pacing the halls, waiting for her to die so they can seize her massive fortune to pay off their enormous Parisian gambling debts.
But the old woman is sharp. She knows exactly what they are, so she creates a brilliant, spiteful legal trap.
She writes a will, leaving her entire fortune to the local parish, cutting the nephew out entirely.
But to protect it, she locks the will inside a massive, heavily fortified grandfather clock in the dining room. A clock with a mechanism that can only be opened on one specific day of the year.
On her deathbed, she makes Molly swear a sacred oath to protect the clock and the will from her ruthless nephew.
And the Marquis is truly ruthless. Once the old woman dies, he realizes Molly is standing in his way.
So he targets the perceived weak link, Mary.
His mother sneaks into Mary's bedroom in the dead of night and offers her a staggering bribe of 50,000 francs.
All Mary has to do is slip a heavy sleeping draught into Lady Molly's tea on the day the clock is set to open, allowing the Marquis to smash the clock open with an axe and destroy the will before the local authorities arrive.
And when Mary tells Molly about this plot, what is Molly's instruction? She smiles and says, "Take the bribe."
Molly instructs Mary to pretend to accept the money, take the sleeping powder, and string the villains along to the very last second.
On the day of the climax, they are all gathered in the room with the monumental clock. The Marquis is confident, because he believes Molly is heavily drugged and incapacitated.
When he raises his axe and suddenly realizes Molly is fully awake and alert, the situation devolves into absolute violent chaos.
A fire breaks out in the room. The Marquis's hired thugs try to physically attack the women, and Molly is right in the thick of the melee.
She relies on her intellect, her spatial awareness, and her sheer nerve to get them out of the burning room seconds before the roof collapses.
She ensures the clock is defended, the will is saved, and the Marquis's plot is completely ruined.
What these two international cases highlight is that Molly frequently, deliberately puts herself and Mary in direct physical danger.
She does not have a squad of armed Scotland Yard police backing her up in these foreign hotels and remote castles.
She is operating completely without a net. She trusts her own ability to outthink and outmaneuver violent, desperate men in real-time, high-pressure environments.
Which is the perfect segue to how she handles cases that seem, on their face, to be utterly absurd.
Because sometimes the physical evidence isn't just misleading, it is deliberately, theatrically convoluted to create an illusion.
Take the bizarre case of the man in the Inverness Cape. A gentleman named Leonard Marvell vanishes into the thick London fog.
His sister, Olive, who is described as this very tall, bony, extremely austere Scottish woman, comes to the police to report him missing.
Shortly after, a glamorous, highly dramatic actress named Lulu Fay comes forward.
She claims she gave the charming Leonard Marvell £200 in cash and her priceless diamonds to have them reset, and he vanished with all of it.
The police immediately treat it as a standard theft. They're looking for a missing man in a cape who stole some jewels.
But the physical testimonies simply do not line up. The timelines are chaotic.
Nobody in the lodging house ever sees the brother, Leonard, and the sister, Olive, in the room at the same time. The maid of the house, a woman named Rosie Campbell, seems perpetually terrified and evasive.
Molly looks at the disjointed facts and realizes the entire setup is a theatrical illusion. There is no brother. There is no sister.
Leonard Marvell is actually a cross-dressing thief. He alternates gender identities with his own wife, who is currently playing the role of the terrified maid to establish impossible alibis.
Sometimes he is the tall, bony sister Olive, and sometimes he is Leonard striding down the street in the Inverness Cape.
To break this illusion, Molly doesn't look for the missing cape. She creates a high-pressure psychological trap designed to crack the weakest link, the wife playing the maid.
Molly dresses up in her own disguise, playing the part of a vulgar, loudmouth, highly aggressive underworld landlady.
She moves into the cheap lodging house where the maid is hiding out. Molly proceeds to psychologically terrorize the woman with fake news, loud conversations about the police closing in, and insinuations that the net is tightening.
She ratchets up the cognitive load on the criminal until the woman breaks. The terrified wife writes a panic-stricken warning note to Olive.
And when Olive, who is actually the male thief in drag, tries to frantically flee the hotel with the stolen diamonds, the police grab her, or rather, him.
And we see a very similar unraveling of the absurd, but focusing on an instinctual tell in A Christmas Tragedy.
An unpleasant, cruel man named Major Seeley is found murdered in his study after a Christmas party. A young, hot-headed aristocrat named Lawrence Smethick is immediately accused of the crime.
The physical evidence is damning. Smethick had a highly public, bitter quarrel with the Major. That very evening, he was seen wandering near the study windows. And most importantly, Smethick's unique, custom moonstone ring is found lying in the dirt just 3 yards from the body.
To the male detectives, it looks like a textbook open-and-shut case of a crime of passion.
But Molly looks at the young man and fundamentally believes he is innocent. She ignores the ring and looks at the household ecology.
She goes down to the dilapidated cottage of a half-witted, heavily abused servant named Haggett and his slatternly wife.
Haggett had recently been brutally fired by the cruel Major. Molly sits in their cramped, dirty living room.
She doesn't interrogate them. She doesn't flash a badge. She just starts casually, conversationally talking about the Major and the gruesome details of the murder.
Suddenly, just at the mere mention of the Major's name, the imbecile servant's face darkens, and his hand instinctively violently grabs his heavy clasp knife from his pocket while he mutters under his breath about doing it.
It is a chilling, visceral moment. It's pure limbic system response. His brain reacted before his prefrontal cortex could stop him.
Molly realizes in a flash that the abused wife and the servant committed the murder out of sheer, desperate revenge for being fired and facing starvation.
The wife had found Smethick's ring, which had actually been thrown into the mud hours earlier by the Major's daughter during a dramatic lover's spat, and opportunistically planted it near the body to frame the young aristocrat and throw the police off their scent.
So what does this all mean when we put these cases side by side? In both scenarios, the traditional police eagerly arrest or pursue the absolute wrong person based purely on circumstantial physical evidence.
They chase a phantom man in a cape, they arrest a boy over a dropped ring.
But Molly looks for the behavioral tell. If you play poker, you know exactly what this is. She looks for the terrified reaction to the fake news or the instinctual gripping of the murder weapon.
She does not just quietly sift through clues. She actively creates high-pressure, emotionally volatile environments to force the criminals to drop their masks and reveal themselves.
Exactly. She acts as a chemical catalyst in these investigations.
She introduces a new, highly reactive variable into the criminal's carefully constructed world, whether it's a loud, fake blackmailer in the hallway or a casual, probing conversation about the victim. And she simply watches how the psychological structure crumbles under the weight of the lie.
It is an active, aggressive, and highly effective form of psychological warfare.
And that concept of psychological warfare brings us to the most aggressive, the most shocking, and frankly, the most emotionally devastating investigation of all.
We have to talk about the secret heart of Lady Molly, the overarching narrative that ties this entire collection of bizarre murders and clever traps together.
Because you have to wonder, for all her brilliance, for all her aristocratic bearing, why is this woman voluntarily working in the dank basement of Scotland Yard, enduring the snubs of lesser men, and risking her life in foreign hotels?
We finally get the breathtaking answer in the final case, Sir Jeremiah's will.
It is a sweeping, tragic, incredibly romantic backstory. The big reveal is that Lady Molly is not just a clever woman, she is actually the daughter of the Earl of Flintshire.
She is high aristocracy, but she holds a massive, dangerous secret. She is secretly married to a man named Captain Hubert de Mazarine.
And Captain Hubert is currently known to the state as convict number 97, serving a bleak, miserable life sentence in the notorious Dartmoor prison for cold-blooded murder.
The details of the crime that put him there are brutal and seemingly airtight. Hubert's grandfather, Sir Jeremiah, was a vastly wealthy, incredibly stubborn shipowner.
He passionately hated Molly's father, the Earl. When Hubert defiantly declared his intention to marry Molly regardless of the feud, the furious grandfather threatened to disinherit him completely.
A London solicitor named Stedman came down to the country estate to officially draft the new will that would leave Hubert penniless.
But before the will could be signed, Stedman was found murdered in the Elkhorn Woods, his skull violently crushed from behind.
And lying right next to the body was Hubert's distinctive blood-stained walking stick. Hubert was arrested, convicted in a sensational trial, and sentenced to spend the rest of his life breaking rocks on the moors.
And here's the detail that truly breaks your heart. On the very day he was arrested, knowing full well he was likely going to be convicted and sent away forever, Molly married him in secret.
She bound her life to a condemned man, and then she made the ultimate sacrifice.
She joined Scotland Yard. She subjected herself to the danger, the sexism, and the grueling work for one soul-consuming purpose, to gain the legal power, the investigative resources, and the access to classified police intelligence necessary to prove her husband's innocence.
Every single case she solved, every brilliant deduction she made, every promotion she earned was just the stepping stone towards saving the man she loved.
But the climax of this overarching story is just, I am still absolutely floored by it. Let me set the board for you.
Good.
Molly discovers that the real killer is a man named Philip Baddock, the man who ultimately inherited the massive estate instead of Hubert. Baddock didn't act alone. He has a terrified accomplice, an ex-nurse named Felkin, who has hidden the physical written proofs of Baddock's guilt.
Molly is slowly, methodically closing the net around Baddock, but then absolute disaster strikes.
In the midst of her careful plotting, her husband Hubert manages to escape from Dartmoor prison.
He is on the run across the freezing moors, a desperate, hunted fugitive with dogs on his trail. Through a twist of fate, he makes his way to Appledore Castle, which is Baddock's estate.
Baddock sees an incredible opportunity to play the hero. He hides the escaped convict in a secret wardrobe in the castle.
Why? Because Baddock is secretly, obsessively in love with Lady Molly.
He thinks that if he protects her fugitive husband, he can use that leverage to manipulate Molly into abandoning her investigation and perhaps even running away with him. He thinks he holds all the cards.
And what does Molly do when she finds out Baddock is hiding her husband? She does the unthinkable.
She picks up the phone, calls the local police inspector, tells him exactly where the escaped convict is hiding, and then she stands there, stone-faced, while the police drag her own husband out of the wardrobe.
They put him in heavy iron shackles and drag him back to the horrors of prison. I mean, think about the sheer emotional discipline of that. She turned in the man she loves.
It is the ultimate game theory move. It is like a chess grandmaster deliberately sacrificing their queen, their most valuable piece on the board, just to secure the checkmate 3 moves later.
Was this a moment of pure cold calculation, or was it an act of desperate, terrifying faith?
This raises an important question regarding the very nature of justice and sacrifice in these stories. By turning Hubert in, Molly does something completely unexpected and strategically brilliant.
First, she instantly removes Baddock's leverage over her. He cannot blackmail her if her husband is already in custody.
But more importantly, she creates an environment of absolute chaos and panic. By bringing a swarm of heavily armed police officers descending onto the estate to capture the convict, she forces Baddock's cowardly accomplice, Felkin, into a sheer panic.
Felkin sees the police everywhere and assumes they are there for him. He panics about the hidden written proofs of their original crime.
Felkin desperately tries to retrieve the evidence from a hiding spot. He knocks over a lamp, a massive fire breaks out, and Felkin dies in the flames trying to save the blackmail papers.
Molly, braving the inferno, secures those half-burned proofs. The evidence is finally irrefutable. Baddock, realizing he has been completely outplayed and is caught in an inescapable trap, commits suicide on the very granite memorial he had hypocritically erected for his victim.
Hubert is officially pardoned by the state, and Molly, her singular mission finally accomplished, leaves the police force forever.
It is an incredible, breathtaking journey. When you look at the entirety of Lady Molly of Scotland Yard, you realize she wasn't just solving quirky puzzles for the intellectual thrill of it like so many of her literary peers.
She was a woman actively, aggressively navigating a rigid society that constantly underestimated her.
She used her deep empathy, her unparalleled psychological brilliance, and her sheer, unflinching nerve to save the life of the man she loved. She took the very system that had unjustly condemned him, the police force, the law, the patriarchal assumptions, and she weaponized it to tear the real killers down.
And she accomplished all of this by intimately understanding the cognitive blind spots of her era. She understood that an Edwardian society obsessed with status, with rigid gender norms, and with superficial appearances was fundamentally, fatally vulnerable to anyone who had the intellect to see past those illusions.
She saw the human beings sweating and panicking beneath the giant hats and the aristocratic titles.
So I want to leave you with this thought.
Yeah, as you go about your week, the next time you see someone being casually dismissed or underestimated because of their social status, their gender, or their appearance, whether it is the person cleaning the office after hours or someone hiding behind a fashion statement, remember the lessons of Lady Molly.
You might just be looking at the smartest, most dangerous person in the room.
Indeed. And her legacy leaves us with a truly fascinating ethical dilemma to ponder long after the book is closed.
Absolutely. Because while Lady Molly operated within the technical confines of the law, she constantly, ruthlessly manipulated the police force.
She withheld crucial, life-saving evidence until the precise, perfect, dramatic moment.
She set elaborate psychological traps that actively drove guilty people to suicide, and she played a highly dangerous, high-stakes game with people's lives, including the freedom of her own husband.
It makes you wonder, does true poetic justice sometimes require a brilliant mind to treat the strict, rigid rules of the law as mere suggestions?
A phenomenal question for the ages.
Something to mull over the next time you think you have a situation entirely figured out. Thank you all for joining us on this Chesterton Radio Deep Dive. Until next time.